In the past 24 hours of fighting, at least 4 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed in the east of the country. Another 10 people were wounded in ongoing confrontations between Kiev's troops and pro-Russian separatists. Up to 1,000 people have been slain since September, when a ceasefire was signed between the two warring sides. The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has accused the West of attempting to force the ouster of the government in Moscow through sanctions. The Kremlin's top diplomat also added that while ties with Europe would not be severed, it will not be business as usual.
As for the concept behind the use of coercive measures, the West is making it clear it does not want to try to change the policy of the Russian Federation, which in itself is an illusion. They want to change the regime. Practically no one denies this.
Speaking in the capital, Moscow, Lavrov also alluded to the possibility that the US-led coalition's operation against the IS in Syria is a mere guise to topple Syrian President Bashar al-Assad.
This is not so much an operation against Islamic State as the preparation for an operation to change the regime secretly under the cover of this anti-terrorist operation. The Americans say that Assad's regime is a very important factor that brings terrorists to the region to try to topple him. I think this is absolutely perverted logic.
We are now joined by Marko Gasic. He is a Balkans affairs expert. Mr. Gasic, is the end game of the sanctions against Moscow the toppling of the government in Russia, like the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said?
Foreign Minister Lavrov is, I think, entirely correct. Regime change is the name of the game. It's been the name of the American games throughout the period since the end of the Cold War, when America has been systematically toppling smaller countries for its own reasons of global supremacy. And Russia, of course, is the biggest prize of all. With its resources, with its financial and military might, it's a big problem for the US. And certainly regime change is clearly the agenda for the US. And I believe that the mechanism that he's referring to is effectively to discredit Mr. Putin by using Ukraine and Russia's inability, America hopes, or Washington hopes, I should say, to defend Ukrainian Russian interests as a way of discrediting Putin domestically, and therefore replacing him with a puppet of their own choosing.
Yes, but by acknowledging the costs of further sanctions against Russia, why are leaders like British Prime Minister David Cameron or German Chancellor Angela Merkel willing to go ahead with them?
Well, I think the stakes are very high here. I mean, we are talking about the future, really, of the world. Who is going to run the world? Is the world going to be run on fair and equitable principles, a multipolar world, or are we going to have a unipolar world, as Washington insists on and demands of its NATO allies? So Germany and the others are falling into line, because really what we're talking about is NATO attacking other countries by all means, fair and foul. And in the Russian case, they are threatened by an independent Russia because ultimately the Russians need to be brought under control, because if they're not, then the American eastward expansion will have led to nothing, because the Russian reaction to America's eastward expansion has been to begin a program of de-dollarization with China, which is, as they know, America's Achilles heel, because effectively America can create as many dollars as it likes and use them to buy the world for free. Well, unlike Russia, China, India, and the rest of the world, who have to produce and sell things before they can buy things. So only the Americans can consume the world without having to produce anything. The dollar is America's Achilles heels, and China and Russia know it. So they are now bypassing the dollar, chipping away at the dollar's supremacy in a way which is a very risky game, because, of course, what happened to Saddam Hussein and Colonel Gaddafi when they announced they wouldn't be taking dollars any longer. So it's a very risky game to play, but they have to play it because the future of the world depends on it.
Yes, now speaking of the situation in eastern Ukraine, 1,000 people have been killed in the last 2 months. Have the Minsk talks done anything to bring both sides to a solution?
Well, the problem is that there's wider interests at stake. As I say, the Ukraine has been used by the US in a way to go into the soft underbelly of Russia, to bring its forces and the NATO forces in general closer to Russia, to try and intimidate Russia and to force the population to vote against Mr. Putin because Mr. Putin will be described as the problem for peace, and then a Russian puppet will be duly elected who will simply give the US what it wants. So the stakes are larger than just Ukraine. Ukraine is simply the battleground, a square on the global chessboard on which the battle is being fought.
All right, Marko Gasic, Balkans affairs expert, thank you for speaking to Ali Tuja.